Welcome back for another Sheriff of Sodium video. Today I'm going to talk about something that has become an increasingly important battleground in the residency selection arms race, the research arms race. Now what you're going to hear is actually a version of a talk that I got to give recently at a conference on research integrity, but this is an issue that has far-reaching implications not only for that topic, but also for medical education and academic medicine and biomedical science at large, and I think it's a topic that deserves more attention and scrutiny. But I'm going to begin here. This is Jay McLean. Back in 1915, he was a second-year medical student who wanted to become a surgeon. But McLean, he didn't just want to be a regular surgeon. He wanted to be a Johns Hopkins trained surgeon. And Johns Hopkins surgery, that was the department of Dr. William Halstead. Only the best and brightest got a chance to be one of his interns. So to prove his worth, McLean sought out a research mentor, and he met Dr. William Howell, an MD PhD pathologist who had previously served as the dean of the medical school, and Dr. Howell gave him a little project. McLean was tasked with evaluating various tissues for procoagulant substances, and after doing a number of experiments involving pulverized pig brain and ground ox heart and oxalated dog plasma, he actually found some, and here's the first author paper that he wrote about it in 1916 in the American Journal of Physiology. But McLean also found something else, a substance that inhibited the coagulation of blood. Actually, I'm going to let him explain. At first, I said nothing to my mentor, Dr. Howell, about this. It was not part of my planned problem, and it took time to satisfy myself. I'd been working alone, in no way assisting Dr. Howell. Anyhow, he was then engaged much of each day in a dark room, watching precipitates of fibrin form through a microscope. So, after more tests and preparation of other batches, I went one morning to the door of Dr. Howell's office, and standing there, he was seated at his desk, I said, "Dr. Howell, I have discovered antithrombin." He smiled and said, "Antithrombin is a protein, and you're working with phosphatides. Are you sure that salt is not contaminating your substance?" I told him I was not sure of that, but it was a powerful anticoagulant. He was most skeptical. So, I had the lab tech bleed a cat, and into a small beaker full of its blood, I stirred in all of a proven batch, and I placed it on Dr. Howell's laboratory table, and I asked him to tell me when it clotted. It never did clot. The substance that McLean identified is what we now call heparin. It's one of the most important drugs in all of medicine, and it was discovered by a medical student doing a research project. And of course, this is not the only such important medical advance made by a medical student. Actually, medical students have made, or at least contributed significantly, to many major medical advances, from the discovery of insulin to the development of anesthesia and x-rays. So I've got some good news for you. Medical students are doing more research than ever before. Just take a look at how the number of PubMed indexed papers with medical student authors has increased 7-fold over the past decade. There has never been a time, in all the times, when medical students have published so much research. Surely, we are entering a scientific renaissance with medical students leading the way. And lest you doubt that this new golden era is upon us, I want you to inspect also these data from the National Resident Matching Program. This is a graphic from their charting outcomes in the match report in 2024, and it indicates the average number of research abstracts, presentations, and publications for graduating U.S. medical students. It's broken down by specialty and whether the applicant matched or didn't match. Those are the blue and green bars. So just look how bright the future is for our understanding of diseases of the skin, where nowadays the average successful dermatology applicant reported having 27.7 scientific abstracts, presentations, and publications. And look also at the scientific progress that we're making in orthopedic surgery, where the average applicant now has 23.8. But where we're really going to see our knowledge pushed beyond even the wildest dreams of our predecessors is in specialties like plastic surgery and neurosurgery, where in 2024, the average applicant had 34.7 and 37.4 research items, respectively. These are things that they've already contributed to our collective understanding, and this is just by the time they've submitted their residency application. This is scientific progress so unbounded that it can't even be contained within a standard y-axis on the NRMP's graphic, which, if you'll note carefully, goes only up to 24. So those tallest peaks are already truncated. And if you're not truly and utterly gobsmacked already, then please allow me to share with you just how much these numbers have changed over the past decade. Here are the same data from the NRMP's 2014 report. Now look at those peaks. It's like comparing the Appalachians to the Rocky Mountains. Actually, if you go back just 10 years, the average successful medical student then has fewer abstracts, presentations, and publications than the average unsuccessful, the average unmatched medical student does today. Never before have we seen such a wellspring of interest in scientific research than what we are seeing today. There's a study in every student just waiting to get out. And surely this unprecedented desire to contribute to the body of scientific knowledge is going to lead to discoveries even grander than Jay McLean's. Right? Right? Well, I guess I should drop the act and show you one more piece of data from the NRMP. This graphic shows the match rates for applicants of different educational backgrounds, those from USMD schools, USDO schools, and non-US citizen international medical graduates by specialty. There's a lot going on here, but the point that I want you to take away is that there's scarcity. Across the board, there are fewer residency positions than there are qualified applicants. And if you look closely at the specialties that seem to be ground zero for this explosion in research, they are the most scarce and most competitive specialties: neurosurgery, plastic surgery, orthopedic surgery, dermatology. So yeah, I don't think this explosion in research has anything to do with advancing science. Doing research has become less about answering questions and instead turned into an extra credit assignment for the most driven students who will seize any opportunity for a competitive advantage. Research is just another checkbox that applicants must tick off right between a high USMLE Step 2 CK score and leadership in the Dermatology Interest Club. What students are discovering is probably less important than whether it's PubMed indexed. Research output is just another battleground in the residency selection arms race. And I think that's a shame, which is why I started talking about this topic some years ago. But sometimes when I talk about it, I get some pushback. So before I go further, let me acknowledge some of that. I mean, practicing medicine is fundamentally a scientific endeavor, so aren't we better off if more doctors do research? Also, without an incentive to participate in research, many medical students wouldn't. But the thing is, there are some students who initially just flirt with research and they end up falling in love and becoming outstanding physician scientists. So isn't that a good thing? And honestly, even if they don't fall in love with research, by doing it, wouldn't doctors learn skills that help them evaluate research in their own practice? I mean, maybe this research arms race is a good thing. Actually, let me steelman the pro-research and residency selection argument just a bit, because there will always be scarcity in residency selection. I mean, even if you add more positions, there will still be a scarcity of the kind of position that applicants really want. So scarcity is inevitable, which means that competition is inevitable. The only choice we have is how we want applicants to compete. So why not let them compete with research? I mean, if we ask applicants to compete with their USMLE scores, there could be some good for society that comes from that. I mean, our very most ultra-competitive residency applicants will enter residency and practice maybe with more medical knowledge in their head. And who knows, maybe somewhere down the line, someone will walk into their clinic one day with profuse vomiting 6 hours after eating reheated fried rice, and they'll blurt out, "Bacillus cereus," and then go tell them to see their PCP, because this is, after all, the dermatology clinic. Or if we have applicants compete by kissing butts and looking good on rounds so that they can get clerkship honors, I'm sure we'll end up with competitive residency applicants who have learned some skills that will help them succeed in academic medicine. But again, I don't know that that's the competition that's going to bring the most good to patients. Right now, we have a world in which many applicants get the opportunity to become an orthopedic surgeon or an otolaryngologist because they made AOA, or because they had a higher class rank, or because they went to a nicer medical school, or they got a nicer letter of recommendation. And all those things are nice, and some of them might result in patient care that's improved in the future. But let's be honest, making those things the arena for competition, it probably doesn't have the potential to change the world. On the other hand, encouraging scientific research might, because every now and then you might get a J McLean. So let's start to pick at this a little bit. There are potential benefits to having more medical students and residents do research, but there's no free lunch. That benefit, any benefit, costs, and we should consider what the costs are so that we can decide if the benefit's worth it. So the first thing we might think about is opportunity cost. Medical school lasts 4 years, same as it did back when Jay McLean was in medical school, when there was less medicine to learn. Same as it did when I was in medical school, which wasn't that long ago, but back in them days, significantly fewer students did research, and those that did fewer projects. So one important question to consider is, what is getting squeezed out to make room for students to do all these projects? And is that thing that's getting squeezed out, is that going to make them more or less effective physicians in the future? But actually, as the research arms race has continued to heat up, for a growing number of students, medical school doesn't last 4 years. In recent years, more students have chosen to add a full year to their undergraduate medical education to focus exclusively on research. In dermatology, for instance, nearly 11% of applicants now take a research year. Now, nowadays, only a quarter of medical students go straight from their undergraduate studies into medical school, and that's often because they need a few years to do some extra CV buffing. Meanwhile, as more residents go into fellowships and sub-fellowships, the length of postgraduate medical education has never been longer. So what are the unintended consequences of continuing to lengthen medical training in this way? Not in a top-down, intentional, purpose-driven manner, but just by stretching every little piece out just a little bit. And just to dispel any myths, medical students are open about the transactional nature of what they're doing when they do these research years. When asked, a plurality of students acknowledge that they're doing the research year to enhance their residency application. So, again, is this what we want? If we want to make research output the arena for deciding who gets to be a plastic surgeon or otolaryngologist, should we be concerned by the fact that some schools make doing a research year easy, and others don't really have that pathway at all? Should we be troubled by the likelihood that students with more financial resources are going to be the most willing to pay the costs of an extra year of medical school? Do we think that this competition is fair? More to the point, do we think it's likely to select the students that we want to be the backbone of the future plastic surgery and otolaryngology workforces? And before you answer that, you may also want to consider this. When you look at medical student publications, men publish more than women. Students at the top 40 medical schools publish more than those who are not at those schools. And there are racial differences too. So if this is the system that we want, at some point, we're going to have to wrestle a bit with why these disparities occur. There are financial costs too. And I'm not even talking about the actual cost of doing all these research projects, which is likely enormous but very difficult to quantify. I'm talking only about the cost of publishing these papers. As of 2022, around 15% of medical student research articles were published in journals with mandatory submission or publication costs. And that 15% figure, that's up from around 3 to 4% in 2012. But I want to think broadly about the costs because there are other costs too, including costs for research and scholarship itself. Here again is that paper I cited earlier about the rapid growth in medical student publications. But for this project, we didn't just count up medical student publications. We actually looked at them in some granular detail. And when you do that, even though the quantity of medical student publications is up, there really wasn't any suggestion that the quality of those publications was increasing. There was no increase in high-quality study designs, for instance. Actually, the greatest increase was in perspective-type pieces. When you drill down on the nature of medical student publications, we found that nearly a quarter of them had received 0 citations. Their contribution to our overall body of knowledge can charitably be described as uncertain. So there is an explosion of research, but it seems to be driven by surveys and retrospective case series from a single department. Let's just say this isn't Jay McLean mic dropping a beaker of anticoagulated cat blood on his mentor's desk. And the likeliest reason for these trends and this preference for quantity over quality, it should be obvious. Because in a world where many residency fellowship programs receive 100 applicants for every position that they're trying to fill, it's very easy at a glance to tell who's done more research. I mean, you just look at the length of their CV. But it's much harder to determine who has done meaningful research. But let's dig a little bit deeper into the costs to research integrity, because we also have this phenomenon of so-called ghost publications. These are research items that appear on an applicant's application, but they never seem to make their way into the literature. And it's a substantial proportion. For ophthalmology applicants, for instance, 29% of publications that were listed as submitted when they applied to residency still weren't identifiable as having been published a year and a half later. And 66% of the work that was listed as being in preparation was still being prepared, I guess, because people couldn't find those papers either. I think the most likely explanation for these ghost publications is that the main value of the publication wasn't its scientific merit, it was its ability to adorn a CV. And once the research project had filled that purpose, it had maximized its value, and there really wasn't any point in pushing it further. Of course, it's possible that some of them were altogether fraudulent and never even existed. Because when you turn research into the game that applicants have to play to get into residency, some of them are going to bend the rules. In fact, 20% of orthopedic surgery applicants misrepresented their publication record to residency programs. Maybe by switching the author order, maybe by changing the journal name, maybe even by listing something that doesn't exist. And if that cost to integrity doesn't bother you, then maybe this one will. Because just because an applicant's name appears on a publication, I mean a real publication, not a ghost publication or a misrepresented publication, it still doesn't mean that that person actually did the work or wrote the paper. There are marketplaces where real authors sell author positions on papers. Here, for the sake of example, is a tweet from one of my co-authors highlighting the opportunity to purchase authorship on an orthopedic surgery paper for the low, low price of just $1,800. I mean, at that price, I don't know how any serious aspiring orthopod could not afford to become a published author. And when I tell you that $1,800 is a good deal, buddy, I'm not blowing smoke. Here's a menu I found of other potential papers that you, even you, could author. Wouldn't a paper entitled Machine Learning-Based Monitoring and Prognosis of Chronic Kidney Disease Patients look nice on your application? Or, I don't know, maybe you'd rather be the lead author on Predicting Stroke Risk Using XGBoost Algorithm and Electronic Health Records. If that sounds good to you, you could be the first author for just $8,000. Now, I want to warn you that some of these papers, they might not be that good. Actually, they might have just been written by a chatbot. And they might be in a journal that you've never even heard of. It might be, even, that the person who's selling you the authorship position runs that journal themselves. But hey, no harm, no foul, right? Applicants are just playing the game, and if a program director gets fooled, shame on them. I mean, it's not like this garbage is actually being used to guide patient care. Most of it never gets cited, right? So if your paper gets you into residency and then it just sits by itself, unread in some dank corner of the internet, who cares? Well, there's one other cost to research integrity that we should consider, and it applies not only to outright fraudulent papers like many of these, but also to the proliferation of low-quality research that's fueled the medical student research renaissance. It's what I call research pollution. The publication of stuff like this is not harmless, especially in a world where AI informs and implements so much research. When you give medical students or residents or fellows or faculty the imperative to publish or perish, not many of them are going to voluntarily choose to perish. They'll publish something. Maybe it's not very good, but it's there. It's there on their CV, and it's also there for legions of AI bots to discover and digest as training data. And then when someone asks a new question and uses that AI bot to frame their inquiry, guess what pops up? And guess what happens when that bot's output is used to do something new? We get even more research pollution and an even dirtier training pool for the bots that we depend on to help us churn out even more slop that gets covered in fellowship positions or faculty promotions. My opinion on all this was most succinctly and eloquently stated by the statistician Douglas G. Altman in 1994 in the British Medical Journal, when he wrote, "We need less research, better research, and research done for the right reasons." Medical research has the potential to do good things for society, and the fact that more medical students and residents are doing it, it has the potential to be an engine to drive forward that good, but only if things get framed in a certain way. There's some big picture things that need to be done, but there are also some simple structural things that could be done relatively easily and could improve the research arms race for medical students and residents. So I'm going to quickly tell you what some of those things are. Let me start with an obvious one. Place a cap on the number of publications and research items that an applicant can list in ARIS or residency CAS. Because if you want to give applicants an incentive to pursue quality over quantity, you got to stop rewarding them for just showing you the longest list of publications. Limit it to 3 to 5 and let every applicant show you their very best work. I've argued for this before in other forums, so I've heard the pushback, but I'll be honest, none of it I've found convincing. You want to take your best shot in the comments, go ahead. I do appreciate that some residents would prefer to compete with their number of publications, and they believe that the number of publications that they've generated tells programs something meaningful about themselves. And honestly, they're right about that. But it still doesn't mean that we should all just bear the costs and externalities of incentivizing research pollution on scale. I further appreciate that some applicants, like those with MD PhDs, may have earnestly generated lengthy CVs that can't be captured adequately in a snapshot like this. But bro, program directors don't got all day. The more stuff that everyone lists, the less any of it gets looked at. And this is just the screening application we're talking about. You know, we have an interview for a reason. Capping research items, it may have some unintended consequences, I'll acknowledge that, but it does shift the incentives away from sheer volume and toward higher quality. And on balance, I think that's one thing we need. Next, ARIS and Residency CAS should include full text links to anything that you list as one of your 3 to 5 items. Because in a world where computers exist and applications are created and reviewed on computers, there's really no reason to add friction between the AMA reference that you see in the application and the actual work that it corresponds to. Make it easy for program directors and interviewers to actually read your paper. I mean, if someone has similar interests, you want them to be able to read your stuff at a click. Plus, including a clickable DOI link or just uploading a PDF would also, I think, put a stop to some of the low-grade integrity issues that I mentioned before. I mean, you'd have to have a real pair to misrepresent your research to a program director when they're discovering the truth would only take a mouse click. Next, improve the data reporting for applicant research output. Now, this one probably needs a little bit of an explanation. We saw this graphic earlier from the NRMP's Charting Outcomes report, and I explained how the bars represented the mean number of research items by an applicant's preferred specialty. But there are at least 2 very important limitations to these data. The first is that the NRMP statistics aggregate all research items. So as you can see at the top, the number corresponds to abstracts, presentations, and publications, which is not really the most useful way to do it. Because, as any good researcher knows, one research project could result in multiple abstracts and presentations before it becomes a publication. So all these numbers are going to be inflated by a certain amount of double counting the same project. So one simple improvement would be to disaggregate publications from abstracts and presentations so that the overall numbers are more interpretable. But even if you did that, there's another big limitation, which is the only data point that's reported by the NRMP is the mean. And although the mean is a fine measure of central tendency for normally distributed data, there's really no reason to believe that these data would be normally distributed. They're almost certainly going to be very skewed data with a long tail of applicants who have done a lot of research, and that's going to drag the mean upward. Now here we actually are making some progress because just this summer, the AAMC began sharing some more detailed breakdowns of applicant research that demonstrate this point very clearly, really. Here's a screenshot from the AAMC's webinar earlier this summer where they plotted the scholarly output by specialty. So we've got a couple of box and whisker plots here. Take a look first at emergency medicine and family medicine, which are the orange and purple boxes. Note that 20% of applicants in these specialties had 0 research output. The average number for both specialties is around 3, but the top 10% of applicants in emergency medicine and family medicine, they had 13 to 200 research outputs. On the right side, they've got neurosurgery, which is pink, and orthopedics, which is green. And obviously, the mean research output in these specialties is higher, and only a small number of applicants, less than 3%, had no research output. But the spread at the upper end is enormous, with the top 10% of applicants reporting 70 to 300 research outputs in neurosurgery and 50 to 250 for orthopedics. These outliers heavily influence the mean, and they make many applicants who are honestly very typical feel like they're way behind their competition and they got to do more research. Higher quality data reporting from the NRMP with corresponding match outcomes, it might help ensure that the perception of the research arms race actually matches the reality. I want to give you one last one, but this is a big one. We need to provide mission-driven, transparent communication on selection criteria from programs. Again, this requires a bit of explanation. When we examine the residency selection arms race on any of its many battlegrounds, it should be immediately obvious to you that applicant behavior is driven by a desire to stand out to residency program directors. Program directors' preferences, either real or perceived, are the main driver of what applicants aspire to be, or at least what they aspire to accomplish while they're in medical school. When a program director says jump, applicants say how high. So the first thing we should do is ask program directors, especially those in the most competitive specialties, is this really what you want? I mean, is it truly the case that you believe your program is best served by bringing in residents who take an extra year to grind out a few fast, low-barrier projects, not out of an authentic, passion-driven scientific interest, but just to ensure that their application even gets read? What about beyond the program? I mean, is this the future workforce that you think is best for your specialty? Are these the traits that are going to best serve patients with skin diseases or orthopedic problems or neurosurgical issues? And if so, if this is what we really want, then keep chilling, say nothing. But if it isn't, then I think some different guidance to applicants is in order. Be very explicit and say, at our program, we neither need nor want to see a long publication list. We care about something else, and here's what that thing is. Or maybe, at our program, we care about research, very deeply in fact, so much so that we would rather see serious, meaningful involvement in one real project than a handful of surveys with an 8% response rate or retrospective case series from a single department. We would rather see one project that you truly got off the ground than 10 projects where you managed to get your name on your mentor's paper. We really don't need to see another perspective piece on COVID-19 or burnout unless you are truly passionate about those topics. But before I close, I want to circle back to where I started with the rest of the J McLean story. Dr. McLean got into the Johns Hopkins surgery program and finished his residency there. I'm sure the strong recommendation from his mentor, who went on to develop purification techniques for heparin, I'm sure that helped. But here's what's interesting. McLean never published much research after that groundbreaking 1916 paper. I could actually only find a couple of case reports that he authored. Those were in the 1940s. Ironically, one was on the use of heparin to treat patients with gangrene, and the other was on the use of heparin to treat endocarditis. He had a few academic appointments, but he spent the latter part of his career as a private practice surgical oncologist in Georgia. And I think this is the great truth about the use of research and residency selection. Most students aren't interested in it. As soon as they don't have to do it, they won't. It's a vehicle to get them to a place they actually want to go. But that doesn't mean it can't be good for society. It can, and sometimes it is. There's more potential good in using research for residency selection than some other things we might use. But to maximize the good and minimize the harm, we have to structure the system very carefully. There have to be incentives to do good work instead of just CV stuffing. There have to be impediments to dishonesty and fraud and the dissemination of AI-generated slop that functions as research pollution and benefits no one except the owners of pay-to-play journals. We have to give some serious consideration to leveling the playing field if this is really the competition that we want applicants to play. And we have to have some honesty about the opportunity costs and when we reach the point of diminishing returns. Jay McLean did good work. And when he did, he got into the residency program of his dreams. And he left us with something that saved innumerable lives. It's a win-win. And obviously, it would be naive to think that in the modern era of bioscience, when most of the low-hanging fruit has long since been harvested, that very many medical students could ever independently make discoveries like this. But I don't think it's naive to think that we could transform this wasteful and harmful research arms race that we have now into something that could actually bring some good to both the competitors and society at large. There's a lot more that I could say and much that would have to be done to improve our system, but for now, I'm going to stop. As always, thanks for listening.